Hi, my name is Reed Silverne. The name of the show is Fed Pride. Reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and proud of it. Anything I say on the show will be obsolete because this is live to tape. When I sit here today, for me, it's February 13th, Friday. For you, it'll be February 15th, a Sunday, or February 17th, a Tuesday. And again, this is live to tape. If I fall off my chair or I accidentally turn off my sound, which I've done before, then you will see it as if it was live, but you are looking in a window to the past. So basically, last week I talked about the stimulus package, and I said that anything I said will probably be obsolete because it'll probably be passed by Sunday or Tuesday. And that's what they claimed. However, it wasn't passed at all. It didn't pass in the Senate, I believe, until a few days later. And then it went to a House-Senate conference. Now, basically, the Senate bill and the House bill were completely different. The House bill had a much higher component of spending and was about $820 billion. When everybody got finished with the Senate version, it had kicked its way up to $900 billion. And then, of course, the Republicans refused to cooperate. And everything came down to 3 or 4 very, very liberal Northeastern Republicans. Olympia Snowe, the other Republican from Maine, whose name escapes me at this moment, and Senator Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania. So they were willing to cooperate, but only on their terms. And their terms were cuts, cuts, cuts. So what finally came out of the Senate version was a little over $800 billion. That was still too much. By the time it came out of the conference committee, or at least this agreement that came in to the conference committee, the total package is down to $789 billion. Now, let's step away and think. $789 billion, an incredible amount of money. Just intense. So what got pulled out in order to satisfy the 3 Republican votes? First of all, why do they need 3 Republican votes? There is such a thing called cloture. Basically, in the Senate, this is not true in the House. In the House, the ruling party absolutely rules. If they don't want something on the agenda, they don't put it on the agenda, and the minority party can do nothing about it. So basically, everything can pass by a simple majority, and if the majority party keeps discipline among its members, they basically can do anything. The leadership can do anything. Consequently, the stimulus bill, because Obama wanted it, passed very, very quickly and easily in the House. Now, the Senate is run differently. Originally, people don't know this, or people don't remember this, and if you read the Constitution, you'll find out that there wasn't direct elections of senators. Senators were picked by the legislatures of the various states. So the Senate, which kind of mimicked what the House of Lords was supposed to be in England, the purpose of the Senate was to be a body that represented the state governments in the federal system. And the early founders of the nation felt that Congress, not the presidency, would be the number one or the leader of the 3 checked and balanced branches of government. Well, that didn't quite work out. We have an imperial presidency. There's no doubt the president is able to declare war, even though the Constitution specifically says he can't. Basically, he can declare a police action other than war. So basically, we have had the Congress come in and pass a resolution rather than a declaration of war to authorize the use of force. And that's what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. But for all intents and purposes, the last so many wars we've had, the last so many violent actions we've had, the president was able to do it on his authority as the commander-in-chief. So Bush went even farther, basically said, if I don't like a law, I will put a reservation on the signature, on the signing of the law, to ignore this or to ignore that if it limits my power. So Obama appears to not agree with that, but we'll see what happens when there's not a majority party supporting Obama as president. Right now, the Democrats control both houses and the presidency, with one exception. And that exception is what we call cloture in the Senate. And the Senate, you have to have a vote to cut off debate. Otherwise, you can have a filibuster and debate can go on virtually forever. So you can't even have a majority vote on a certain item or a certain issue or certain law without having a cloture vote first. And cloture votes require a minimum of 60 votes. That's because the Senate was set up the way it was set up, they didn't want either a whole bunch of small states ruling over the Senate or the South ruling over the North, and the North ruling over the South, because, of course, the nation was founded while the issue of slavery was still in effect. So they didn't want the regions to dominate each other, and there's no doubt about it. If you take a look at the map of the Northeast, there's a bunch of small little bitty states, whereas the South had Georgia and North Carolina had some states that were larger in area, to say the least. So since the Senate is set up by 2 representatives from each state, a region with a lot of states could basically ram anything through the Senate. So it was arranged so that debate needed 60 votes, a supermajority. So basically, for the Democrats to rule with an iron fist, they need the presidency, they need 61 senators, and they need a majority of the House. The Democrats have the presidency, have the majority of the House, and control the leadership of the House, but they only have 58, not 61 senators. And that's why it was so important pick up those 3 Republican senators, because after conference, if there's a change to the bill, and of course the House and the Senate bill are different, so the resulting bill that comes out of conference needs to be voted again by each House. And right now, as long as Olympia Snowe, the other senator from Maine, and Arlen Specter stay on board with the agreed package, they have enough to prevent or to do cloture. I think cloture is the act of stopping debate. To prevent a filibuster, which is the act of debating and debating and debating and not letting something go for a vote. So you have a situation where basically you can get it passed. Why is it so important? Obama thinks it's important because the stimulus will restart the economy. Whether that happens or not, we'll see. But basically, I've been talking about the immediate tax cut. The resulting tax cut that came out was $282 billion out of the $789 billion. I've been talking about a $500 tax cut or tax rebate, basically, for each individual, and $1,000 for a couple or a family. However, that got cut. So it's only $400 for an individual, and you can expect an extra check for $800 once this thing gets passed and signed once and for all. So that's better than a sharp stick in the eye. Anybody on Social Security, I said that there was a special tax credit for seniors, so that'd be $250. If a senior pays taxes, let's say there's 2 seniors, a husband and a wife, they'll get $800 plus $250 each, so they can get up to $1,300. And the hope is that they'll run out and they'll spend that money. And we'll see whether they do or not. But there's one of the components of the $282 billion, well over $70 billion, is the alternate minimum tax. Now, I have been a Fed most of my career. I have to admit, I've never had, I've been virtually a one-income family. I've only hit the alternate minimum tax once in my entire career. However, there's people who are in upper middle class who are making two husband and a wife both work. Maybe there's some other income going into the family, interest and so on and so forth. They net it all together. It's above the alternate minimum tax. What is the alternate minimum tax? There are certain tax breaks that get offset if your income is above a certain level. So if your income is above a certain level and you have a whole pile of kids and you have a big mortgage deduction and you give money to charity and you have medical bills that you deduct and so on and so forth, you itemize, you can still, depending on which deductions you have, there's a test, and I don't know exactly how that test works, that says, look, you're just taking too many deductions. We don't want super rich people to get away with murder, and you have to pay a 26% plus alternate minimum tax. Now, that was meant for people who were many, many times the average income in this country, the average household income. And so it was really people with very high salaries and the quite wealthy. People who are making well into above 100,000. I think the point is somewhere in between 100 and 150. I don't know the exact number. But at one time, and when they passed this thing in the first place, I think it was possibly during the 80s or maybe the 70s, very few people, regular people who had a regular job and worked for the government or worked in construction or wasn't a CEO or a big banker or the owner of a major business, hit the alternate minimum tax. Well, we've had a change of culture. First change of culture is we have many, many, many two-income families out there. Plus, we had a situation where there was a sudden rise in home prices, which is being normalized now. Basically, I think that the average home in America has gone down 18% in the last year. However, if someone had to buy a home at the top and had two incomes, they were just barely making it. But they were above that minimum for that alternate minimum tax, in which case the government said you have to pay 26.9% or whatever the alternate minimum tax is. You can't take all these deductions to get your income tax down, 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 down. It was passed because too many millionaires were not paying taxes at all. There were instances of sports stars who were making millions and millions of dollars. By the time they played the tax game with their consultants, they weren't paying any tax. So Congress was upset and they passed this alternate minimum tax with the intention that the middle class would not be impacted. However, the alternate minimum tax that was passed originally never had an escalator clause. So if inflation was 5% or inflation was 10% or average incomes went up 5 or 6%, the alternate minimum tax stayed just where it was. So decade after decade or year after year after year, it got to the point where the upper middle class, two-income families, a doctor whose wife works in an office could actually hit that alternate minimum tax and exceed it. And all of a sudden, all of those deductions that, especially in the Bush era, that Bush got you, were offset. And it was ironic because the Bush income taxes, which wiped out the Clinton surplus, were supposed to help the upper middle class. However, more and more of the upper middle class kept on creeping and creeping into that alternate minimum tax. And it got to the point where before this big giant crisis, the actual tax revenues started going back up again. and the net yearly deficit started going down. Of course, that's completely out the window now because last year we gave away literally hundreds of billions of dollars to try to get ourselves out of this financial mess. So the alternate minimum tax, we're talking about $79 billion. Basically, they're calling it a tax break to raise the alternate minimum tax and to exempt more and more of the upper middle class so that really only the wealthy gets stuck into it. That's $70 billion tax break. I don't know if that's a tax break or if increasing the ceiling for the alternate minimum tax was the intention all along, but that's basically what happened. They were going to dump, some of the things that got dumped are significant. There's still about $70 billion in there for the federal government to take over a large part of the states' payments into Medicaid. More and more people. Medicaid is the program to cover poor people. And it's a program that's kind of mandated to the states, but the states have to pay so much and the federal government kicks in a share. But basically it has grown and grown and grown, especially during a period of very high unemployment, where the states are just putting in more and more, and it's becoming one of the largest individual line items in the states. Basically, except for one or two northern states that had high commodities, the states are going broke. This particular recession is hitting the states incredibly hard. Some states have unemployment already at 10. I think parts of Michigan and Indiana are already at 15% unemployment. So basically they are losing revenue left and right. And a lot of the people, a lot of the revenue that had been there, which was capital gains, well, I don't know anybody who's getting the capital gains right now. I'll tell you, if you're getting the capital gains right now, you are a genius because you're playing the market right. But most people lost their shirt in the market in the last 2 years. The S&P 500 at one point went down almost 50%. It's recovered a few percent since then. But basically, the bottom line is they're losing any income that comes from capital gains at the state level. The actual taxes are down. The income tax is down. More people are unemployed. But worst of all, a lot of the states are dependent on property tax and developer taxes, amounts that are imposed on developers as a minimum per unit tax. Because let's face it, the fiscal crisis started with real estate, and hardly any real estate is getting built. There are just too many houses. There's an excess of 2 million units right now in the market throughout the United States. So what developer is going to go into Arizona or Nevada, the most overbuilt states, with the biggest drops in home value, and start building and building away? There's nobody who's going to buy it. If they are out there to buy it, they're going to buy a foreclosure at a real deal. So probably below construction price. So that's basically the problem that's there. And that is another big cut to income of states. So states right here in Arizona, they're cutting, I believe the initial figure was $300 million to the universities, U of A and ASU and so on and so forth. I think that cut was reduced a little bit, but basically there's been a tremendous cut, and state jobs are going down the drain. So Obama keeps on saying, I am going to save or create 3.5 million jobs. Well, the subsidies to the states, trying to get some of the pressure off the states so that they can keep their payroll going, keep from laying off health inspectors, keep from laying off highway patrolmen, so on and so forth, and keep the roads maintained and all the other things that the states do. The states funnel a lot of money from the federal government to the local governments as well, to the school districts, was to keep the people that are already working. And the Republicans didn't like that. So the Republicans cut $25 billion of direct aid to the states out, but they left the $70 billion that's going to the state portion of Medicaid, and that should do a lot just in itself to offset some of the budget cuts that the states are experiencing. So California, for instance, $42 billion shortfall. They basically, what they're going to do is they're going to take every worker, and the workers are going to be off without pay 1 day a month just in order to save a certain amount, and that's not nearly the amount that they're short. So it should help a little bit. So that's basically it in a nutshell. We don't know the details. At least I've taken a look at the New York Times, and I don't see a lot of the details. However, the subsidy to the state got cut. The tax credit got cut a little bit. In order to get that number down below $800 billion. That's basically what Olympia Snowe said. Is, I am not going to vote for it unless it's below $800 billion, and it is below $800 billion. So that's basically it. What you see is what you get. There's still about $170 billion of infrastructure spending for energy, green energy and solar and wind energy and all that good stuff. The smart grid is going to get built, which is basically we have giant sets of wires that go in one direction but don't hook up to other grids. So we have a number of grids, and when we have a problem with electricity, one grid can be short and another grid can be over, and we don't really have a smart grid throughout. There's going to be a lot of money for people who go out there and weatherize homes. They're hoping that a whole industry that will hire people who've been laid off from the construction industry to go out there and put insulation into houses and weatherize windows and so on and so forth. Another thing that did get cut was the subsidy that was going to rebuild and build new schools to try to take some of the burden off of the local school districts. Basically, that got cut by the Republicans. They just could not vote for it. They couldn't keep the total under $800 billion with it in there. I think that was about $20 billion. The only thing that they left was some money to refurbish schools so they could hire people to refurbish schools. So a lot of that infrastructure spending, roads, road projects and so on and so forth, they're not stated in the bill itself. So Congress is not saying you're going to build a bridge from Juneau to the little island across the strait. That's the famous bridge to nowhere. You're not going to build here, and you are going to build there, and so on and so forth. There were a couple mandates. For instance, they couldn't renovate the mall, which is where the Smithsonian and the Vietnam Memorial is in Washington. I'm not sure why that particular project got cut, but somebody didn't like it. And the subsidies to the states just to keep people on the payroll, that's out too. So we'll see what happens. I really don't know whether this is going to rescue much. Gertner came out there with his plan to revive, to create a bad bank. He was questioned. He didn't have answers. He said the plan is forthcoming when they had announced that there was going to be a plan. Embarrassed the president, President Obama. And the stock market went down 4.6% the following day. It's almost like one of those days back in September and October. However, it seems to have recovered somewhat in the next couple days, so it wasn't a permanent disaster. So we're going to be watching the new Secretary of the Treasury, Gertner, and I will have other shows about what I think we ought to do, try to remove the bad assets, which are these derivatives that I've been talking about and which were basically legalized fraud. My opinion, they're virtually worthless, but there is a way to get those off the books. My name is Reed Silverne. Thank you very much for watching.